So now we'll move on. So earlier this week, the Federal Circuit Court in Washington, D.C. blocked the EPA and Scott Pruitt's attempt to block an Obama-era methane rule that sought to reduce methane emissions from oil and gas fields. Obama placed a rule regulating how you have to handle, methane releases and equipment that might have failed to protect against methane releases. And the oil industry, of course, thought that was too burdensome, so their buddy Scott Pruitt, now head of the EPA, sought to block it. At first, he put a 90-day moratorium on it. Then he put a two-year moratorium on it. And the Federal D.C. Circuit Court overruled Scott Pruitt, or said the EPA does not have the authority to just block this rule. If you're going to do that, you're essentially reversing the rule. And if you're going to do that, you got to follow a goddamn procedure to do it. You can't just block it on your own whim. And in fact, they called the decision, Scott Pruitt's decision, capricious. So, I mean, that's of course a piece of good news. It's good that the system is still working. There's still courts there's checks and balances. Interestingly, and I don't know the details of how the judicial system is set up and the court system, and if any members do, please write in the comments below. So the DC Circuit, which is a very important circuit court because all the government cases go there, has whatever, a dozen judges on it. I don't know the exact number. The majority of them, I think, were nominated by Republican presidents, including many from Reagan still. But this was a panel of 3. I don't know why cases sometimes are the full court, or if they're ever the full court or just a panel. If you know any of this, you can jump in. This was a panel of 3 judges out of a dozen. Turns out 2 of them were not, in this case, were nominated by Democrats, one by Obama, one by Clinton. And the 3rd judge is Janice Rogers Brown, who was a big controversial appointment to this circuit by George W. Bush. And she's a name thrown out there, well, all these names are thrown out there for potential Supreme Court nominations one day.
Do you know why the George W. Bush pick was controversial?
Well, because the Democrats thought that she was too conservative.
Okay,
so that's all, just politics.
Not out of the ordinary controversial, like, oh, she had ties to big oil or something.
I don't remember the details, but now it's a routine for the Democrats and the Republicans to block as much as possible the picks of the other president, more so the Republicans, of course, than the Democrats. Maybe she's got ties to some big industry that they think corrupts her. It's possible, I just don't remember the details.
I don't know for sure, I'm just guessing based off of patterns.
It was one of the big judicial fights during the George W. Bush administration, Janice Rogers Brown's nomination. But she eventually got through, and she was in the minority on the 2-to-1 decision on this to stop the EPA from blocking a methane rule. And I'm just glad that the thing worked. I'm glad there are enough Clinton and Obama judges, even though the Republicans did everything they could to stop them. I'm glad there are enough out there that they can still defend the interests of the people rather than the interests of the oil companies in cases like this one. And if anyone can explain how that DC Circuit Court works, why this panel of these 3 judges ruled on this case and not some other panel where it might have been 2 Republicans to 1 Democrat and the ruling would have been the opposite, I'd like to know. Maybe Merrick Garland is the Chief Justice of this appeals court, of this circuit court. So maybe he assigns which judges will hear each case, and then he's putting his finger on the lever there.
How many judges decide on this case? 3?
And this panel of 3.
I can't believe 3 is quorum. You only need 3 judges for these cases, but
yeah,
okay.
Well, all right.
That's rules. I guess on that, I'm still surprised that people still say Trump drained the swamp when the former head of ExxonMobil is now the Secretary of State. And yeah, you have someone like Scott Pruitt as the head of the EPA. That's like an ultimate slap in the face, the idea of draining the swamp. But people are gonna say that this is a response, anytime, what's been going on the right is that anytime there's a case where the government goes against Trump, they call that, oh, the deep state strikes again. This idea that there's some dark secret forces that are unelected, that almost like Illuminati level shit where no matter how much Donald Trump, this like crazy rebel who's gonna shake up the system, tries, like the deep state will somehow prevent him.
Right.
All the deep state is are people who like punch in the clock every day, who like have been doing their same job, and things change slightly depending on what president's in power, but more or less you're just doing the same job for your career, right? That's not the deep state. It's just saying, hey, we're still one arm of the government where politics works kind of as usual. And so we're gonna continue making politics work kind of as usual. And like you said, that means that there are certain checks and balances that are still there.
Yeah, the deep state concept, Jenks has spoken about this recently on the show, is a lot less impactful in the United States than in other countries like Turkey, where it's huge.
Yeah.
So you're right, this is not the deep state.
Yeah, here the deep state is demonized as this big entity. I'm just telling people like, it's just people who work rank and file jobs in government agencies. It's everyday people who like might have a house down the street from you. It's not these secret people in closed, like smoke-filled rooms and closed doors, as people try to say, like the Alex Jones of the world will try to say it is.
But the deep state is, to some degree, synonymous with the military-industrial complex, and that's real. And the military-industrial complex is also people who just live in the house down the street, but there is a...
But there's a difference between like checks and balances acting as checks and balances and military contractors trying to get like contracts for their, get more war and get contracts for their companies.
Right.